mean, my interest in this, particularly from the vantage point of social enterprises, I guess is sort of twofold. Firstly, how do you navigate a system that's so fragmented and accordingly, obviously the kind of budget constrained and volatile. So often it feels like you might have a brilliant solution to a crystallized problem that many people would love to know about, but how do you actually get any traction on the vantage point in this system? So really interested in sharing people's perspectives on that, both our speakers and more broadly as we kind of do our way this is going to work. We're going to have sort of 40 minutes ish, where actually each of the four people are going to spend 10 minutes just sharing a bit about their story, and actually then almost some kind of top tips from the front around how do you find a way of gaining traction, and secondly, how do you get noticed? How do you stand out from a crowd in what is an essentially a very busy space? I know both within the MAT that I was founder and one of the founders and chairs of, and also those kind of organizations that I know well, just feels like they're being bombarded with offers of helpful help, but really have no space or bandwidth often to give them kind of due credence and pay attention. So often the delete button is what happens next. So yeah, how can we kind of avoid that? So that's really the basis upon which we're going to spend the next sort of hour and a half, 40 minutes, 10 minutes each for our four speakers. I'll let them introduce themselves. And then we're going to have a kind of 30 to 40 minute exploration together, an opportunity for some Q&A, but also just to pick up themes that have stood out for you and the things that you'd most like to explore. So if I could ask you during the course of the four conversations you can kind of put questions in the chat bar, but also just hold them. It's quite difficult to scan when you have so many people. If there's a particular question you're like, when we do the Q&A, I might well just ask you also to put your hand up, and we'll on the control bar, and we'll do it that way. So yeah, but listen, thank you so much for coming along, and I hope it's really helpful, and we're looking forward to the next kind of grant round, and looking at, I'm sure, what will be some amazing organizations. So I'm going to start us off with Johnny. Johnny, are you there? Hello, Johnny.
Yeah, I'm here, Lee.
Okay, Johnny Boddington. I'm going to let Johnny talk to you about his amazing organization, and yeah, we'll crack on. Over to you, Johnny.
Thanks very much, Lee. And really nice to meet everyone on the call. We actually had some support from the SSE with an organization we set up over a decade ago. So it's really nice to kind of come full circle with it, and have fond memories of the work that we were supported on. So great to be here. My name's Johnny, and I run an organization called Impact Ed Group. We've got three parts to our business: Impact Ed Evaluation, that does monitoring and evaluation of social purpose organizations, typically in education, mostly primary, secondary schools, but a bit of higher education and some government work as well. The middle part is Impact Ed Consulting. So we do a lot of consultancy work around strategies and operating models. And then the third part of our business is called TEP, which is the engagement platform, which is a platform that we currently sell into schools and MATs, looking to expand to a broader purpose sector that helps organizations understand the engagement of their employees, and have a background in social enterprise and mostly in education. So I started my career, I don't know how many people here knew or wanted to be a social entrepreneur. It certainly happened by accident to me. I started my career as a teacher. I was working in East London in Bow, and I was working with a group of children who predominantly came from low-income background. And there was a real lack of progression to university. And I just felt that seemed unfair at the time. Coincidentally, my sister was doing a PhD at Oxford in neuroscience, and I got her to come into school to start delivering university-style modules. And it was an after-school club, but it went really well. And we thought, should we try and offer this to other schools? So me and my flatmate, we were living in Stepney Green at the time, set up an education charity called the Brilliant Club. And the reason it was called the Brilliant Club, incidentally, is because on all our early documents, it was TBC, as in to be confirmed, and we hadn't named it. So actually one of our teachers who we worked with ended up naming the charity for us. And that was it. Accidentally, at the age of, I think I was 24, 25 then, we were running a charity, and I think we timed a few things well and caught the crest of the wave with an increasing interest around university access, and widening participation, and managed to scale that charity from our bedrooms in Stepney Green. And I think by the time I did 5 years as CEO there, and by the time I resigned, it was about 10% of UK secondary schools. And I think it's up to about 20% now, under its current CEO, called Anne-Marie Canning. I left there and I went to work for Peter Jones, the guy from Dragon's Den, and ran his education provision. Part of that was curriculum resources, which we designed and sold into schools. And then the other part of that was seed funding for very early stage young entrepreneurs. So we'd lend them 100, 200 quid to start their first business. That might help them get a market stall up and running. And we ran that. We ran that for individuals, but we also ran it through primary and secondary schools. So we'd have partnerships with schools. And then more recently, we've done the work through Impact Ed. So we work with hundreds of schools across the UK in various different forms through partnership models and so on. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I don't think we've always got it right, and we've made loads of mistakes along the way. But I think one thing I have got relatively decent experience of is that sort of front end of trying to get schools interested in your work, and how you build that proposition and how you build that groundswell around your movement. And it's really hard to do. Everything we've done has been social enterprise. So Brilliant Club is a charity, but we only about 90% was earned revenue, earned income, and 10% was fundraising. And we used the fundraising to grow a bit faster than we would have been able to otherwise. But most of it was a social enterprise model. And you guys will all know this, but trying to manage to a bottom line and some sort of social impact is so much harder. And I think it would have been a lot easier if we were just trying to make money, and we'd have done things differently. But because we were trying to adhere to our various different charitable or organisational missions, it certainly makes things trickier in some places. Interestingly, the rest of the ventures I've been involved in, actually Peter's seed funding was all charitable. Everything else I've done has been one form of social enterprise or another. The thing I'm personally passionately interested in at the moment is employee ownership, which is what I think we'll probably end up doing with Impact Ed Group. So that's sort of my experience, and happy to take any questions on any of that. I've got 3 top tips. So we were asked to think about how do you get out into the system and how do you make yourself stand out. So there are 3 areas that I wanted to talk to briefly here, and I'm going to keep it about primary and secondary schools, but happy to take questions on anything else. My first point is that my vast experience of this is that head teachers buy with the heart. So I see people go in sometimes with a proposition that tries to make financial sense and saying, here's the budget, you can pay for it, or you could use free school meals allowance or so on. And the trick that I sometimes think social entrepreneurs miss is that head teachers aren't there because they want to run an organization. Head teachers aren't there because anyone's trained them in procurement. Head teachers are there because they love teaching kids, and they want to have a positive impact on all the children in their schools. Now, what's kind of hidden in this comment is that I believe you need to get to the head teacher. So it's really hard if you're trying to build a platform and marketing to teachers in general. They might be decision makers, but they also might not be. Whereas if a head teacher is interested in what you're saying, then they can be the decision maker. And my hunch is that for most things, and just having a quick read through the list here of what people are working on, some of which the ideas sound, really fantastic, is that the majority of stuff that people are selling in is not major, capital investment. It will be in the region of, if it's 10 grand or less, it's pretty much discretionary spending for a secondary school head teacher. It is a rounding error on their £5-6 million budget. And if you're talking to a multi-academy trust, it really is discretionary spending. So I wouldn't worry too much about, trying to make a sort of a business case for it at an early stage. I'd really major on trying to work out what the problem is, get a clear articulation of it, getting them to understand it, and then empowering them to do something about it. So if I take the Brilliant Club, our opener was always, did you know 1 in 2 private school kids go to a top university compared to only 1 in 10 state school kids? We think that's a bit unfair, but only 1 in 50 children from free school meals would achieve the same thing. We think that's deeply unfair. and you'd see a nodding head, especially in a school with lots of children from low-income backgrounds. We want to do something about that, and we think here's a solution. So we give them the problem and the solution at the same time. And we found that that was the most compelling way to sell, was to always lead with our mission and try and get them excited about it. Now, you need a foothold, so you need to go and find the head teachers who are going to be early adopters. Who are the head teachers who are in your networks or friends of friends or contacts? And, you know, some of my great beliefs about social entrepreneurship is people think that, you know, you can spend 3 years sitting in a room working on a really neat business plan and then take it to the world. My experience of it is that's not how it happens. These things are iterative and incremental, and you just take each foothold as it comes and you build your base out from there. So that's the first bit. I'll caveat that by saying multi-academy trusts are becoming increasingly sophisticated in terms of procurement, but there are still enough head teachers with autonomy to buy into what you're doing. And unlike most businesses, you've got the address of every single one of them. It's publicly available. Now, I wouldn't advocate spamming, and no one's going to reply to a cold call. But if you know you're in a school in suburb A and down the road is another school, you know, that isn't hard to do. You can find out who that head teacher is online, and you can start to build those network maps and start to think about how you're going to access them. So anyway, that's the first thing, is try and make it really obvious why what you're doing will benefit the children that the head teachers are ultimately there to serve. The second thing is thinking about your commercial approach in a slightly different way. So build something that's going to be really easy to run and sustainable. From an early stage, quite often you can hard bake in things that become really problematic later. So to give you an example, we thought it was really neat at the Brilliant Club that we try and align all our partnerships around a summer cycle. So basically a school year. Schools run in years, so our business cycle should run in a year. So if they joined mid-year, we'd run them on a half contract till the end of year, and then they'd join everybody on this annual loop. And it was like, that's great. That's when we'll do all of our partnership report writing. That's when we'll do all of our renewals. That's when we'll do all of our invoicing. And it gave us a really neat annual business cycle. And we knew when we could sort of manage that seasonal workload. The problem with that is it created a massive cliff edge every summer where we didn't quite know what the renewal rate would be. And we're like, because if 85% instead of 90% renew, that's materially impactful to our budget. So having thought this through and looking back on it, anything that can make your product sticky, anything that can be multi-year, anything that can lead to recurring revenue, so that every year your opening position of how much revenue have we already got secured, if you can fill as much of that up as possible with subscriptions, then it's a ratchet up model. You know, you only need to add a little bit each year to keep that business growing. If you have got to renew 100% of your contracts basically as new sales, that is an empty opening position, and you've got to do a sawtooth each year, except the teeth get steeper and steeper if you want to grow. So my real steer there is be really clinical about how can you design your product and your program so that it generates revenue and becomes sticky. Another key part of that is getting exposure. So build advocates. If you're working with a school, don't just work with one person. So let's say you work with a head teacher, design a report that they can send to their governors, to their leadership team, and to all their employees. And that way your brand proliferates and becomes part of their institution. So when that head teacher leaves, the contract doesn't go with them. So yeah, and that relates to the third point, which is about building a network of advocacy, building a system of advocates who sell and promote your business for you. So a really quick one there is getting an early board of advisors, who are people who are passionate about what you do, have other jobs, have other careers, but are happy to turn up once, twice, 3 or 4 times a year to give you a bit of advice, but you also give them your sales material and ask them to go out into the world and promote stuff for you. Another key part here is don't be in the lobby, be on the stage. So if you go to any school conference, there's always a lobby where you can pay money to go and put a stall out, and there's like 30 organizations there, all trying to catch people on their way back and forth from the toilet or the finger buffet or whatever. Fine, that's useful and that's good brand exposure, but you're in the bullpen there. You're playing around with everyone else trying to get noticed. If you can be on stage, if you have something an area of expertise that that group are interested in, and you can put yourself out there as an expert and do it for free and give a little and not make it a product pitch, make it an expertise presentation and get on stage in front of school leaders, you're going to find this stuff so much easier. And part of that is just thinking through quite a neat coupling of a research that informs your practice and your go-to-market or marketing strategy. Find a local champion, find someone in any region you want to work in, but really importantly, I'd say get out of London. I don't know where you guys are all based geographically, but London market is saturated. Lee talked about head teachers opening up their inbox and getting absolutely inundated with stuff. Whereas if you go to other parts of the UK, and I think we work way more outside of London now than within it, you'll find schools that are far less targeted. And we typically get a much warmer response and get these local advocates and local champions. And some of the greatest need is, you know, London outperforms every other part of the UK in educational context. So think about where is my services most needed, and also where are children most underserved, and you might find a little sweet spot there. The final thing is, yeah, sorry, Lee.
Just last 30 seconds, mate. Thank you.
Yeah. My very final comment is meet schools where they are. So you're dealing with a workforce that's got an attendance crisis. So you've got lockdown that has reset that social contract we have. Every family used to more or less say school was good, like kids should be in school. That seems to have gone. So you've got a huge attendance crisis. You've also got a retention crisis of staff. So 1 in 3 teachers who've trained in the last 10 years have already left the classroom. And if anything you can do can help schools out with their broader challenges, then be conscious about bringing that into your offer, so schools understand that you get the macro environment and that you're feeding into it. That's it from me. I'm very happy to take any questions on all of that, either through the Q&A or very happy to share my email address as well if people want to pick up offline. I presume there'll be sort of a follow-up, but very happy for my email address to go out in that if anyone's got any specific questions for me as well.
Johnny, that's fantastic. Thank you. So listen, hold your questions specifically for Johnny. I mean, you can put them in the chat box, but yeah, also if you want to in the conversation, just fire away for Johnny. But thank you, Johnny. That's brilliant. Got us started beautifully. So over to you, Greg.
Yes, thank you, Lee, and thanks, Johnny. That was really, really fascinating. Lots resonated with me, and excited to share my experience with you all as well. So my name's Greg. I'm founder of Smart School Councils. Pleasure to meet you all. Some people I met when I was on the SSC Scale Up program a little while ago. Well, probably about 12 years ago now. So it's nice to see some familiar faces. Smart School Councils, essentially, we're a charity dedicated to helping every child to find their voice. And essentially our program gives schools a whole school inclusive way to approach pupil voice. And I think this matters because often it's a small group of the most advantaged pupils who get to have a say in school. And actually the UK has among the biggest inequality in civic education in Europe. And especially when we know how critical those skills are to speak up and to share what you think are in life. I think all of that leads us to think actually there's a really big missed opportunity for developing really crucial life skills in the UK, but also building just a more positive, inclusive democracy, which is something that I think we would probably agree is should happen. So I started Smart School Councils with my friend Asher in Tottenham. We worked, he was a teacher and I was a sort of frustrated ex-civil servant. And we started working in 3 primary schools in Tottenham. Since then, now we're at about 500 paying members across the world. Majority in the UK, but we have worked with lots of schools internationally. Got our first school in Tokyo this week, so we're reaching pretty far, which is quite exciting. Big range of schools, so we're working with primary, secondaries, lots of pupil referral units, SEN settings, high proportion of schools in more marginalised areas. 98% state schools. As a state school educated person, I'm very proud of that. And we're talking just in terms of the context of kind of who we are and our product towards the kind of low end of what it costs. So it's an annual subscription, which kind of resonates with what you were saying, Johnny, about kind of subscriptions can be a helpful thing. We're talking between 300 and 800 pounds that we sell our program to schools for, which I guess is important context because it means that we can't really go out and visit them because then that's the money taken already. You know, if it takes 2 days to get there, and you don't sell to them, then it doesn't going to work out. So what I've got to say is just around kind of the two areas. Firstly, kind of getting into schools, and then secondly, a bit more about standing out from the crowd. And so firstly, I guess the sort of proviso to all of that feels a little bit like these are kind of guidelines of what's worked for us. So there's no kind of one size fits all kind of solutions. I think advice in these sessions can often feel a little bit like kind of sharing your winning lottery numbers and think, oh, you know, you should use these two. They're gonna be great. But actually, they work for me, but actually maybe not somebody else. So I think the key thing with anything you try is to kind of try stuff, review, and adapt. Because it's better than trying a million different things. But I think the first thing I'd say on getting into schools is kind of forget what's cool or what you expect to work. So we're trying to reach lots of different schools. We do it sort of through tech usually. So we're using things like, example in my case is like, so we're using like Facebook ads and Google ads. So as a charity, you get $10,000 of free Google AdWords every month, which is great. And somebody suggested like Bing ads as well. So Bing is like, I didn't know what Bing was until this, but it's essentially it's Microsoft's browser. It's not the coolest browser, but it's I think very well used in about 50 or 60% of UK schools. So actually Bing ads convert at the best rate for us. They get us into loads and loads of new schools. So while I was trying to be cool and all like, oh, let's use TikTok and all this, actually sometimes what is most useful is not what you think or not what you want it to be. So I think that's one thing I would say. The second thing think I'd say is just about starting small. So many ventures, particularly in kind of the edtech space that I meet, when you ask who are you trying to join onto your program, who are you trying to market to, the answer is always like, well, just all schools, all 24,000, 25,000 schools in the UK. And I guess that feels a bit impractical, and that's where you can end up being a little bit spammy. And I think it's all about relationships and starting small. So we started in our three schools in Tottenham, and also now we've got a few more schools. We still really do focus on those areas where we have the least resistance. So if you're just starting out, it's okay to guess what those are, and maybe you're working in a smaller area. But I think for us, the state primary schools in the northwest of England, the Greater London, are the schools where the door has to be pushed the softest to get in. And I think knowing, I mean, maybe those are more democratic areas. I don't know. That's probably a dangerous statement, but knowing where those areas are, where you're going to have a little bit less resistance, I think is really important. Also, I think the final thing I'd say on getting into schools is like smart questioning. So like we do our kind of our flow for getting new schools is organic, so people searching for us, and also some paid search as well. And we try and get them onto a 15-minute demo. So we chat to them. With smart questioning, like you can kind of, it really informs the rest of your like marketing. And so a question that we would ask at the start of every single demo that we do is, so our program's pretty comprehensive. Is there anything specific you'd like to explore today? And so what the teachers would say to answer that question is super helpful, because they're telling you what's important. They're using the words to frame, like that could help you frame your marketing message in the future. And also they're saying like, something that happens to us a lot, and it relates to the previous speaker, is like, your program looks great, but like how much time does it take? Is it I'm a bit worried it's going to take too much time. So then you know that actually in your brochure you probably need to, or your like marketing info, you need to switch up what you're saying, or maybe add a bit more information to strengthen that, because that's a really good question. Yeah, so that's the three things I'd say on getting in or standing out a little bit. Sorry, no, like that first step with schools. In terms of kind of standing out, it feels like when we talked about this, Lee, it feels like I was like thinking through, is this really a challenge for me? It's not my most critical marketing challenge, standing out, because I think for me, what we need to kind of overcome often is getting across our value over a backdrop where schools are so stretched, time poor, and almost for us with our program, it's convincing schools to kind of leave the status quo. So they're quite happy doing, they're kind of, you know, I'm coming along with my big idealistic ideas like, oh, let's change how, you know, pupil voice and democracy works in your school. And they're like, that sounds good, but like, that's not a big priority, and that sounds quite hard. And I think really careful messaging and value is important to help them overcome that, with really, really good implementation to make sure it's super clear. So I guess the three ways we think about that is just like quite provocative and clear messaging. So in our case, we're trying to get them to understand how what they're typically doing is could be improved. You know, lots of stuff through partnerships. So we had an event with the Institute of Education last week where they shared their recent evidence on inequality in how young people learn about democracy. So that's really helpful because it's them sharing and adding to the evidence base. And I guess like it sounds simple, but like for us, overcoming that kind of inaction thing is just being really, really helpful and nice. It kind of goes quite a long way with teachers, like actually being a human, nice organization that when you have a call with them, you send them the stuff they ask for and you follow up on time. And I think all of this should be done as much as possible in an automated way. So we're kind of try and do all of our kind of marketing without any kind of manual effort. So there's quite a lot of like CRM stuff, which is I think really helps with that. So I guess in summary, I feel like it's all about kind of seeing what works for you. This stuff takes time to go from 3 to however many hundreds of schools. And I don't think there's that many shortcuts because it's about relationships. But I would really kind of track and be open to the idea of things working and not working. So, you know, maybe ignore everything I've said, but I think that's hopefully there's some useful ideas along the way there. So thank you very much for listening, and happy to answer questions and share my email if you'd like to talk more. Thank you.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, some resonance with some of what Johnny was saying, but also some really interesting different flavour. Thank you. So again, hold your kind of questions specifically for Greg, and we'll kind of come back to a large group discussions shortly. So yes, let me introduce you to Harriet. I think you may be on mute, Hattie.
Better now. Is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Sorry, turns out fancy headphones don't get you that far in the end. Yeah, so lovely to see you all. My name's Hattie and I am the director of the Politics Project, and we've been around since 2015, and we are a democratic education and engagement organisation. So we're all about supporting young people to engage with politics in a whole range of ways. So yeah, to give you a bit of an intro into kind of what we do as an organisation. So we started just after the 2015 general election, and kind of my story is that I'd been doing work in a mixture of kind of youth spaces and also in politics spaces but decided after working for a charity called Uprising for a little while and working on the 2015 election with them, that there was a real space for kind of an issue with political education, of needing that kind of really clear information for young people that was going to be really engaging and help them to get there. So I think I'll start by telling you a bit about our story and the two different strands of work that we do, because I think through that story I can tell you the good and the bad. It's probably quite instructive in kind of how we've ended up where we are in terms of working with schools. So from that kind of 2015, 2016 point, we didn't start with a particular, product that we wanted to go into schools and sell. We started with a problem that we wanted to solve, and we were really open about how we solved that. So we were really open about whether we solved that, going in and doing big events with schools where we went in for a day and we kind of spend a day and we take over for a day, or whether we needed to do something really intensive for 6 weeks with a group of 10 students. We're really unsure about that. And so the first period of time, I was lucky to have another job at the time, so I was able to kind of work for free, I guess, for a little while. We just experimented with lots of different models and lots of different ways of working. And I think my first idea for how we would do democratic education in schools is what seems like the most obvious model, is that we would design resources and support, and we would do some in-school delivery and some training, and that was how we were gonna deliver our work. And I would say we just found it really difficult, partly difficult to get into schools, but also partly, if any of you have tried to do direct delivery work in schools, the cost of doing that it can be really high, and we just couldn't afford it. It just wasn't something that was going to be a viable model for us. And then in our space, Brexit happened, and Brexit had obviously quite a big impact on politics, and impact in a lot of the way people were talking about and thinking about politics. And one of the things that we looked at when we were looking at kind of, some of the work that we've been doing in terms of impact and how it was going in schools, was that we really felt like we wanted to do something about the relational side of politics, that there was something, if we wanted young people to feel able to engage, it wasn't just about knowledge and skills. There was something about supporting young people to feel more connected to politics. And that sort of started, what is it now, 8-year journey in something that we call political contact. So how can we build relationships between young people and politicians in a way that would support young people to feel more engaged in politics? And at that point, we came up with the concept, which is still kind of our flagship program, which is Digital Surgeries, which is about connecting young people to politicians, predominantly using video calls. So we train and support teachers, we provide resources, and then we organise video calls between young people and politicians that represent them. And our initial journey there was definitely through grant funding. So we were fortunate to find a grant funder that was really interested in what we did, the Joseph Antry Charitable Trust, and they funded us to pilot that approach, and that allowed us to do our initial work with 10 schools in Greater Manchester, where we were able to kind of refine, test, do a lot of the development stuff, which takes a lot of time and energy, and find something that was going to work and was going to be good. And then we got another round of grant funding from the same funder, and that allowed us to scale the project to be national. So we went from having 10 schools to having 50 schools, and that helped us to kind of grow the proposition and the project. But we've never wanted to be 100% grant funded. It just been the natural way for it to kind of progress as we'd started. And so we started to explore opportunities for trading income along the way. The first thing that we did is that we developed a school subscription model to go alongside this. And the way that we used that was that we didn't use that for new schools, but we used that to keep our old schools. So schools that had worked with us, that we had good relationships with, we moved off being grant funded and we moved on to then paying for that subscription, so that we could then continue to work with them, continue to bring in their politicians into the into their schools, and a lot of those schools still pay now to use our services as we go forward. So we kind of used it as a way of kind of, I guess, prolonging grant funding by developing that school subscription model. But we'd already done all that work on building relationships. They'd had a really positive experience. And so for them, it was a really easy conversation with whoever held the purse strings about then giving some money to this project. So that worked really well. The other thing that we started to be able to do was develop what we call thematic versions of our program. So if our core program is all about supporting young people to engage with their local politicians, so their MPs or their local councillors or their regional mayors or whoever it might be, we started to look at, okay, so who particularly might be interested in that? Where's a kind of particular thematic version of that might be interesting? So we started to do a thematic version of the project with the UK government to help young people engage with select committees. And that was something that the UK government then just paid us to run. So we were able to use this pool of schools that we'd built up to then deliver projects with the UK government. And we just started to build several of these kind of different thematic approaches on top of each other. Some of them would happen once, some of them as a kind of ongoing year-on-year projects. And we found that to be it's now kind of our most sustainable form of income. So we're funded by the UK government, funded by the Welsh government, and we're funded by the US Embassy. So we do some sessions with US politicians, and hopefully we're about to be funded by the EU Parliament as well. So kind of our approach to, we've got very much a mixed funding model, but our approach has actually been not all about getting money from schools directly, but about using our relationships with schools and with politicians to then look at who else is interested in these conversations, these relationships, and pulling that together to create those kind of long-term funding relationships. And I think the really exciting thing about that is that the majority of those projects now happen every single year. So they're pretty sustainable funding sources. And if they're coming from sometimes those big institutions and they've kind of been depoliticized within those big institutions, that can feel like a really stable form of income for us. So that's a little bit about our journey with political contact. The other thing that we've done within political contact is that we've tried to become kind of experts in that field. So we've done research, we've kind of collaborated with various stakeholders to, be some of the only people who have ever kind of thought quite deeply about the impact of political contact and best practice. And by positioning yourself in that place, that creates that kind of scarcity, and you become the go-to person for that work and for that project. And again, in terms of bringing in that external funding, that can be really helpful and really useful to get there. I'll just tell you a little bit about the other side of our work, which particularly this year is massive. So since 2017, alongside our political...
Sorry, just another 2 minutes if that's...
Yeah, that's fine. Do you know, well, we just do a lot of work with we have our elections work. So we basically support a network of schools and not schools, a network of organisations across the sector, so about 100 organisations in the democracy sector to collaborate around elections. So I won't talk about that too much because we don't have huge amounts of time, but if we've got time later, I'll tell you a bit more about that. So I'll just go on to talking you through, I guess, kind of my key learnings, and similarly to Greg, these are, not necessarily, this is what some things that have worked for us, but they're not necessarily what you should definitely do. So one of the ways that we get into schools is something called joint approaches. And I should say we work with about 500 schools a year at the moment, similar size to Greg. And joint approaches is when we engage young people's local MPs, councillors, people that want to work with their schools to joint write with us to their schools saying, do you want to take part in this programme? So that means in terms of cutting through to a head teacher, we can use the headed note paper, the parliamentary headed note paper, and send a letter addressed to them from the Houses of Parliament, which definitely cuts through a lot of the marketing materials to get to schools. And in particular, our work in Wales, over half of our schools in the last tranche of that work were all recruited through joint approaches. So sometimes think about who are the advocates in your sector who can potentially help you to reach out to schools so that you don't need to do all of that work directly yourself. Something on working with teachers. I would say be really positive when working with teachers and be empathetic, but also I don't think the entire time that I've worked with schools, there has never been a good time to work with schools. Schools have always been incredibly busy, and teachers will always tell you how busy they are. And I would just say, don't let that put you off. That's kind of part of the makeup, I would say, of schools. So yeah, be empathetic, learn how to speak teacher. If you can't already speak teacher, learn all the acronyms, get in there. But yeah, don't be put off by the potential, oh, this isn't a good time, because my experience is, if there is a good time, then let me know when the good time is, because there never really is. But that's why the relationship building is so important. Couple of other things. We created tiered pricing options so that we've got some schools that pay us you know, as kind of smaller amount if they're just using their kind of small department budget. But we also have then a higher tier so that if they want to dip into a whole school budget, they can, so that you've got that real ability for, you know, if schools want to do that deeper piece of work with you, then they can do, and we found that to work really well. And then finally, yeah, just wanted to kind of leave you with a story, if we've not got much time, of one of the ways that we've worked in terms of collaboration. So with our elections work, we kind of run this network of organisations that work with lots of different schools, and there is an element to that where it could be incredibly competitive. Everyone is trying to work with schools, everyone's trying to get into schools to support them with elections. And we have made a decision that we will do a lot of work, not just to promote our work, but to promote everybody else's work across the sector. So it means that we are sometimes we are recruiting schools and teachers, and we are not just directing them to stuff that we do, we're directing them to stuff that other people in the sector do. And that feels incredibly alien, because normally it's all about kind of covering your homework, keeping your kind of customers with you and not telling them about anything else that's going on. But actually, that's opened so many doors for us, because all of those partners have then got, as Jonathan was saying, have then got us on stage. So we've been on stage at big national conferences, being able to talk about what we collectively do. And it's meant that we can collectively raise the presence of what we've done far more effectively. That's probably something quite specific to doing work around elections this year. So that's probably not something that will work for all of you. But if anyone wants a longer conversation about collaboration, yeah, we're really interested in it, and kind of alternative ways that different social enterprises and charities can work with schools in a more kind of collaborative way, so that there isn't so much for schools this kind of inbox deluge, but actually you can kind of pass people between you a little bit more effectively. But I'll stop there because I think I'm out of time.
Thank you so much, Hattie. Fantastic. I mean, yeah, it's like, the trouble is with all of you, we could basically spend all afternoon just like unpicking amazing stories. It's like, I hope you've got a sense of the depth of wisdom and insight from our speakers. I'm sure that you'll be able to, both this afternoon but later, connect with them. So yeah, thank you. And kind of last and by no means least, hello Hina, how are you doing? It's great to meet you. We've not actually spoken, so Hina's kind of in at the deep end, but yeah, okay. So fantastic. Loving the last kind of 10 minutes, perhaps until 5. So again, if you could just sort of bit about your organization and some of your kind of top observations and tips, that'd be marvelous. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Hina, and I run an organization called Peer-to-Peer Education. We're specifically in London, and I am a SSC fellow. So I've been on the Trade Up course. I haven't actually done the Scale Up course, so I won't probably know anybody here. But SSC for me was sensational in helping me to think about how we could scale different parts of our organization. So I'll start with our story and what issues we've had along the way, how we've overcome them, and specifically more around COVID and lockdown and how that impacted our future work. So Peer-to-Peer was actually founded by my mum in 2015, and she had come from a background in education and designing programs to combat teenage pregnancy in Redbridge a long time ago. And she designed this model where young people would go into secondary schools and teach young people about teenage pregnancy, helping to reduce the rates in the borough. And there was a lot of money around given to the organisation at that time. She worked for another company doing that, and they kind of tried to steal her idea. So she left that company and then started as peer-to-peer. But peer-to-peer in 2015 was new. And she was kind of trying to build up her relationships again in the borough of Redbridge and spreading out into other boroughs. But then sadly, she got really ill with cancer, and it was a very short battle, and died in February 2016. So at that time, I was working for another organisation, and I'm one of 4 siblings. And I kind of was nominated to continue running the company. I had no idea how to run a business. I'm terrible at maths, don't know how to do budgets and things like that. It just would make my mind frazzled every time. But what I did understand was the model that Mum kind of had made and what she wanted to do for young people and the impact that she wanted to achieve. So I kind of sourced different people from different places and different people that I'd worked with previously and said, right, I need you to come and help me. We need to make this work, and we need to make Mum's legacy something that can really change a lot of people's lives. So we continued peer-to-peer, got new people to work, and we designed the whole company from scratch again with Mum's original ideas in it. So how we work is that we create lesson plans on different life skill topics such as sex and relationships education, drug and alcohol abuse, FGM, anything that young people struggle with in their communities is what we kind of deliver. And those lesson plans will be delivered by young people. So young people aged 18 to 30, and they stand up in front of the class, they deliver the lesson plan, but the difference is that they share their own experiences on that given topic. So for example, we have a domestic abuse lesson, and I was in a domestic abusive relationship as a teenager. So when I went to deliver that lesson, or deliver the lesson content, and then say exactly what happened to me as a teenager. And that's what the young people relate back to. So if we're talking about what makes us different to other people that might be doing similar things, it's that we have that experience. We say, this is what happened to us. This is how we've got out of it. This is who we went to help. And in most cases in the schools, we are that organisation that the young people will come and speak to because they relate to us. We look like them. We speak like them. We understand their language. We spot different safeguarding concerns because of that language, and sometimes that's the barrier between the teacher and the young person. So when we're selling to schools, that's what we're selling. We're saying, you're buying into us rather than the content of the program. You're buying into the young people that can come and speak to your young people and engage. So that all went really well. There was loads of issues with staffing, as in we would have really good peer educators, but because they were so good and we gave them all the experience of how to teach, they would then go on to be a teacher or a safeguarding officer or work in social services, for example. So we'd lose all the good people because at that time there wasn't enough work to give them a full-time role. So we had to completely change the model over and over again, where it was worth it for these peer educators to deliver, and that we was doing not only the workshops, but other things like mentoring. So now we go into schools and we mentor the young people. So if we've engaged with a young person in the lesson and we've realized that there might be some language that makes us feel like they might be involved in online grooming or they're in an abusive relationship, we'll say to the teacher, right, we've got X amount of mentoring sessions that are free to the school, and that could be through us being funded, and we'll pull them out of the class and we'll speak with them for 5 weeks. And it's not like counselling or anything like that. It's literally a safe space for the young person to speak to us, and that is what pulls us back to the schools each time. The teachers see that we're engaging with the young people in a way that other people might not engage, and the young people are opening up to us every single time. However, fast forward, it now becomes COVID times and lockdown came and hit us badly. All the schools were closed and all of our work was in schools with face-to-face delivery. So we had nothing. We had no money coming in. We didn't get paid for months. And at that time, I was on the SSC Trade Up program, and my tutor, if you like, Niels, said to me, how do you now change the business so that if you can't be in front of somebody, you're still achieving that impact? So then we came up with two ideas. We came up with two ideas. One was to create workbooks, and these workbooks were like PDFs of content that we would usually deliver in the lessons, but a fraction of what we're delivering. And these were sent out to schools, to the local councils, to family support workers, and they were used to engage with the young people and still achieve impact that way. But that didn't make us any money. So then the other thing was we created a mentoring program to work with corporate organizations and young people. So matching up young people from disadvantaged backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds with corporate organizations that wanted to change their diversity and inclusion models to get more young people into those higher positions in their company. So how it works is that the young people mentor the corporate organization on diversity and inclusion, and whether their projects and their work that they're putting out is inclusive enough and representative of different backgrounds. And the corporate organization will mentor the young people on how to get into different sectors. So we're specifically doing it with the creative industry. So how to get into the creative industry, what barriers the young people face getting in and how they can overcome those, what their career plans are, interview skills, all of those soft skills bits they cover, but also getting actual on-the-job experience. And then by the end of it, one young person wins a 2-week paid work placement, and they get paid really well for those 2 weeks. That model was funded, the first model was funded by SSE, one of the grants. It was quite a big grant, and that covered all of the operational costs and the selling costs and all that sort of stuff. So we got into the first company and they loved it, and they've booked us 3 years in a row. And now we're selling that into more corporate organizations with more schools. And that, again, just builds on the relationship with the schools because they're seeing that we're achieving more impact again. And it's not a cost to them, but also for us to be able to get sustainable income from these corporate organizations that can then feed back into the company, meaning that we can deliver more free workshops to more schools. I don't have lots of tips on how to get into the schools because we hate trying to get into the schools. I think what has worked for us is the ongoing relationship and proving our worth in the school. So once you are in, trying to maintain that relationship. And one thing that I do that is a bit time consuming, but it really helps, is being that friendly person that somebody mentioned earlier. Being that friendly person and remembering things like if they've mentioned their child's birthday is next week and you're emailing next week, say, oh, how was your child's birthday party last week? Hope they had a good day, and things like that. And they really remember that. Making sure that you're on top of the communication with them, so not forgetting to send anything or to call at a specific time, don't be late to meetings, and asking them who else in the borough would be interested in your services. So a lot of our work was able to spread around each borough, so specifically Barking and Dagenham, Havering, Newham, and Lambeth, was because we were able to build those connections in one school, and then they introduced us to the other schools and said that our service was really good. We always tried to engage with people that we already know because that just makes it much easier. And having the subscription model as well. So I know others mentioned that too, but we kind of offer a one-off workshop or a drop-down day, and each time if they're booking more workshops, they get like a very small discount, but it means a lot to the school. Or we offer a whole annual program, and the annual program is what keeps us going because they're booking us for their whole PSHE program when we're in every week. So the young people are familiar with our faces, the teachers are familiar. And we've mentioned as well today that the teachers don't have any time. They don't want to do any extra work. And for peer-to-peer to work, we go in and say, we're taking all of that off your hands. If we're doing all of your PSHE, that means you're not writing the PSHE content, you're not doing the evaluations of the PSHE content. We're ticking all the boxes on your sheets that you've got to report back to the government. So we will make sure that we're covering all the RSC checklists in all of our workshops and making sure that they're able to say they've achieved this in their lessons and they've met this target. And our impact reports are always representative of that. So we achieve over 95% to 98% of a success rate for each workshop. So say, for example, if we was delivering anti-knife crime, the awareness increase is always between 95 and 98% of the consequences around knife crime. So showing those statistics back to the schools in a really nice looking impact report is what makes them say, right, this is worthy of us paying into this service. A lot of our money does come from grant funding just to pay for project costs. It means that we get to give the schools free workshops rather than trying to hassle them for money. But there's a lot of the academies and the schools that we worked with at the very beginning that continue to pay us for our service. So it's a mix of both. And then the reverse mentoring program gives us extra money, which is really good because the costs on maintaining that project, the outgoings are very low. So the profit on that is really good. And then we get to put that back into the workshops. So I would say that it's been a real roller coaster. We have really good times where we're delivering really well and all the time. And then other times when our work goes right down. But that's when we usually come up with our new ideas. So I'm kind of the creative behind everything and coming up with all the projects. And then because I'm bad with numbers, I have the other people that are selling and making sure that we're adhering to budgets and things like that. And the local council pays us as well. So we don't have to bid to them anymore. They kind of have given us contracts to continue working. So if we're following certain trends in the borough, so for example, Barking and Dagenham, one of their high targets is, sorry.
Last 30 seconds, if that's okay.
Yeah, one of their key priorities is to reduce knife crime in the borough. So they have specific funds around community safety and anti-knife crime. So they have actually contracted us to deliver each year. And that's something we get a pot of money to deliver for free. And that means that we're always in the schools, even if there's no money within the schools. That's it.
Thank you so much, Ian. That's brilliant. I mean, just loving that, the kind of inside out approach there, quality counts, kind of innovation, and then just tracking the relationships right the way through and using that as a platform for expanding and getting your kind of customers to be the people who sell for you. It's like all of that makes so much sense. It's like a emergent heavy lifting model, I reckon. Amazing. But yeah, so listen, thank you so much. I think first of all, before we kind of do any questions, I think like a collective, everyone unmute, round of applause, I reckon. For, yeah, thank you very much. Very good. Yeah, thank you. I mean, so much there. Right, rather than trying to summarize, I'm just really interested in, you'll notice down the bottom of your screens, there's a reactions button for those of you that haven't used it. But if you could just put your kind of hand up through the reactions button, if you've got a particular question or a kind of comment, and either to direct at any of the speakers or more broadly the audience, that's fine. So yeah, kind of use the hands up button. Excellent. So I'm going to ask, I've got Herm here. So whoever Herm is, you just put your hand up. If you could unmute and fire away with your question. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Oh, you've gone back on mute. Yeah, there we go.
Sorry, you won't be able to see me. I've got problems with my visuals. I've just wanted to ask a general question to all the presenters. Thank you very much today. Excellent, really nice hearing that and different ways of actually how you've gone about with regard to work in schools, education, especially your background, which is quite varied, and the last story as well with regard to from peer to peer with regard to story with regard to the mother. Let's see. Have you found in your work, have you been highlighted in reports like, via Ofsted reports or any national reports as such? And has that actually been a help to you, or has that been a hindrance to you with regard to your organisation in scaling up, or with regard to spreading the good work you've done? Hello?
I suggest that any of the four.
Yeah, anyone could answer. Just a question for all of them. Anyone, please.
I'm not sure that we've been in Ofsted reports but one particular school asks us to do more in-depth evaluation forms, which shows the impact that we're achieving in each program that we deliver with them. And I think they use those that data to report back, but I'm not sure whether it's for Ofsted or for their internal reports.
Okay,
And I
thank you.
haven't seen it as a hindrance. It's just it's more work, I guess, because you have to make sure the evaluations are right and the questions that you're asking are right, and making sure that you're getting the data each time you're delivering. But if you include that in your delivery model anyway, it shouldn't be too difficult.
Okay, thanks for that, Hina. Anyone else like to answer the presenters at all?
Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, we've been mentioned a couple of times in Ofsted reports, and it's sometimes interesting how it goes through channels that you don't always expect. So we've actually got lots of schools that use our projects not for democratic education. Well, they do use it for democratic education, but they also use it for oracy, which is obviously a big part because we're supporting schools to have these conversations with decision makers. So sometimes it can kind of crop up in ways that you don't expect. But actually, the more useful stuff for us is that we've been mentioned in PMQs and we get mentioned in kind of council changes and places like that. So all of that is really useful for comms. So not Ofsted, but that's comms.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Happy to jump in as well. So when I was at the Brilliant Club, we used to get mentioned in Ofsted reports quite a lot, and that's actually really useful. Head teachers are all, scared of Ofsted and scared of their grading. And getting anything, the other thing we got was something from the DfE saying at the time it was an effective use of pupil premium spending, which was like a green light, like the regulator likes this and the funding is in place for this. And that made the decision a bit easier for head teachers, I think. So I'd really, really recommend, you can't do much to make it come about though. It depends on the kind of work you're doing, but it's not like you can write to Ofsted and say, please consider us in your reports. But if your head teachers are advocates, and the other thing you can do is think about the inspection framework. I don't know what the recent frameworks look like, but giving them the bit of information that they can put forward is sometimes helpful too. And reports in general, report writing and trying to get a bit of traction is such a great go-to-market strategy. If you can be in the editorial rather than the paid for adverts in whatever industry, press or national press you're in, it's so much more useful in terms of opening up conversations. At Impact Ed, we produce reports. So we write impact reports and evaluation reports for a lot of our clients. And it's a useful way of getting our name out there. What I will say, though, is sometimes it can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. So if you work in a very sensitive area, so for example, we do some work with an organisation that works also a bit like Hina on PSHE. And, you can see how some of those topics, gender identity, for example, as soon as you say one thing, the other crowd are going to come out and say very loudly why you're wrong. And any of those binary issues can become a bit toxic. So you just need to be careful about when you're using marketing or not. I'll give you a live example at the moment. We do a relatively light touch, actually, evaluation of Oak National Academy, which is the online school provider. We don't work, well, we work for Oak, we're commissioned by them, but we're not part of Oak. And we're indifferent to their mission, like we are our charities. Generally, we support that they're for kids. But Oak is funded by the government and by the taxpayer, and it's got a bunch of people who think it's brilliant and a bunch of people who think that it shouldn't be part of government. It's a non-departmental public body. Because we did their report in a relatively light touch way, that is doing the rounds on Twitter as all the people who love Oak are shouting about it, but all the people who don't like Oak are criticising it. And our name is on it every time it gets circulated with a negative comment. So, there are pros and cons to this, and you just got to weigh it up carefully. But getting, the old adage, what is it? There's no such thing as bad press. I do sort of believe that. If people are talking about you, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Great, Jonathan. Thanks for that insight. Really insightful there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other kind of questions or comments? Far away at the bottom of the screen, we have our reactions button. This is the interactive bit, people. We got any more questions? Natasha, fire away.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask a question building on something Jonathan just said. Thank you. My organisation looks at consent specifically in schools and universities, and I use theatre as a model for opening up discussions and conversations around consent, and definitely can be a controversial topic, which I've experienced within the business. What you were just speaking about, Jonathan, of some people absolutely love it and have huge advocates, but then have people that really kind of shout it down, particularly as it's an LGBTQ inclusive model as well. And I just wondered if, and this is to all the speakers, but obviously, Jonathan, you just mentioned it, if there's anything else that you've experienced, if you working with controversial topics in any way, that can help with that scalability and approach in schools when there might be a lot of fear around your topic as well. So all the other stuff of time and everything still being present, but fear being there as well. I'd really appreciate any thoughts.
I suppose just quickly from me, and there might be others who feel better placed to come in on this, but I think that depends on the work you're doing. If you're campaigning, so if you are campaigning for a particular cause, you know, you have to stick to it and you've got to get that issue out there and shout about it. But in education, I typically find people who are working in the PSHE space, and it sounds like maybe you're not dissimilar, is you're probably more campaigning around that we should be having a conversation about this and that children should be engaged in learning about the pros and cons of any particular topic in some of these more controversial areas. I don't typically find people are going in and saying one thing or the other. And therefore, having your party lines really well organised. So, for example, one of the organisations we do work with do a lot of work on sex education with children. And when they're talking to the head teachers, they will be pointing out some of the issues that this society are facing, that young people in schools are facing, and that there are real problems here. And if we hide from them, the negative consequences are almost entirely always going to be for children. And that actually for head teachers, they need to be engaging with some of these topics. You know, you can't ignore it anymore. So I think, so to just wrap that up very briefly, be clear on whether you are campaigning for a particular cause, in which case you've got to go all guns for it, or if you are just trying to create a safe space for people to explore and consider these topics. And if you are the latter, make sure, one, it is a safe space, and that two, you are aware of the adverse issues that are affecting children and why it is so important that people are exploring these topics. But the one thing I will say is that there is like nasty rhetoric in the press that you might hear about some of this stuff. My experience is 9 times out of 10, if not more, head teachers are very progressive and will see things from kids' point of view because they're dealing with a lot of this stuff day to day. I can see Hattie and Mia have got their hands up.
Yeah, Hattie, if you could fire away.
Yeah, I was going to say, as an organisation that talks to young people about politics, we're quite used to having conversations about controversial issues. I'd say it can be a little bit of a double-edged sword with schools. So there's some schools that want kind of nothing to do with it because it's difficult and it's controversial. But actually, for lots of schools that decide they do want to do something with it, it can be a really good. They can often be, do you know what, we want some external support and advice and help to deliver that. So it can be a way into schools where if you've got something that's kind of a little bit more difficult. I think a lot of it is about a little bit building on what Jonathan said, just really deciding yourself where your lines are, what your approach is, and kind of going through a lot of those issues yourself in advance, so that you can then just be very confident and know how you're kind of back things up and deal with things. But schools will want you with things like that. There will be existing guidance that they've got to adhere to. So there's advice for schools on political neutrality. There's also advice, I'm sure on PSHE, that they need to advise to. So it can just be really useful as whether if it's resources, if it's training, to link it directly to any kind of advice that schools will need to follow. But one thing we look at all the time is teacher confidence and the teacher journey to feel comfortable to deliver something. And it's really similar to the student journey. And that's, I think, something that's really important to consider as well, is what sort of teachers are you trying to work with, and what's the outcome, what's the journey for them. So really understanding that in terms of whether it's somebody that you're, if you're just selling in a product, or if you're actually working more directly with them, it can just be really important to think about them and where they're up to as well.
I'll just quickly add, sorry, I'll just quickly add, just because obviously we're doing similar work. So we talk about consent. A lot of our work is around RSE, and a lot of the schools are scared about that, especially in different areas where the demographic don't necessarily agree with relationship sex education. But what we do is to make them feel more confident is we might share a snippet of what we'll be delivering, or the outcomes of the lesson, and just showing that we always say we're not saying go and have sex, for example. We're saying if you're going to go and have sex, this is how you do it safely. These are the consequences of if you don't. Wear protection and things like that. So I think for the teachers to feel comfortable and to still book your services, it's just them understanding exactly what you're delivering and what kind of language you're using, so that if the parents do approach them, they know what they could say to them. The government's also put out something where teachers can request to see your material beforehand to protect themselves. So we've found that some of the teachers that are booking us now are asking for that material, and before we would never show our material in advance just in case of people ever stealing it, but now we kind of have to make read-only worksheets that they can have a look at, so that they're fully on board and they're comfortable with what is being put out.
Thank you so much. That was all so helpful, and really, really appreciate your advice.
Thank you, Natasha. That's fantastic. So yeah, anybody else? Is that Laura?
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Hello, my name is Laura North. I'm CEO of We Speak. Johnny, I know that you talked about the importance of talking to heads. And I just wonder if you and the rest of the panel have any top tips about the best way to reach the decision makers. And if you can't connect with heads, is there anyone else that in schools that is good to speak to?
Thanks, Laura. Yes, so we try and organise our strategy about getting to head teachers, or increasingly actually senior leadership teams. You've got a situation where I think it's now nearly 2/3 of schools are in a multi-academy trust of different flavours. Some multi-academy trusts have very local, decentralised decision making, so the head's still basically autonomous, and some are very strong centrally. So, they don't really have any procurement decisions. It's all handled by the centre of the trust. But more often than not, I find, you've still got thousands and thousands of schools where head teachers will therefore have the decision-making ability. And if it's a pupil-facing or clearly an individual school rather than a map product, I'd still try and orientate a strategy around getting, at least initially, to head teachers. And this is kind of the point I was making earlier, is I don't think there's one great big strategy, and I think Greg spoke to this a little bit as well, where you're suddenly going to be in 1,000 schools within 12 months. I think you are going to have to find a few footholds and then leverage and keep leveraging until you've got a community of advocates. But what I would say is that if you have got a school where it has gone particularly well, and you have the opportunity to make that head teacher look good, now there's different ways to do that. One might be showcasing them in your own reporting and then shouting about it through your various different channels. One might be trying to get a press placement in Schools Week or something and inviting them to comment and talk about their school. Another might be trying to use them as a case study for a bit of research you're putting out. But anything that can give them a bit of a platform, and it's that whole kind of go-giver approach of, trying to come up with something that is mutually beneficial and provides them with a platform and helps them to look good and helps them on their mission and their drive as well. There's another spin on that, by the way, which is, like, especially when I was working in University Access, some head teachers latched onto that as their personal mission once we'd sort of given them all the material for it. So trying to get people attached to your mission and become those advocates for you. So they might not have started there, but you might be able to get them there. But yeah, once you have got them once you've got one or two, using them. So what networks are they involved in? What roundtables are they going to? Might they bring you along? Might they give you 10 minutes at the end of a roundtable meeting, and so on and so forth? And then ultimately, what big conferences are they at? Is there a way to get on stage, and so on? And it is that network building and mapping out. And as I said earlier, there's only, including primary, 20,000 of these individuals in the country, and you know where they all exist. So you already have that network map. It's sort of drawing the line with a highlighter between them and ticking off the ones you feel you can get to, and then leveraging and go again, and leveraging and going again. And the bit that's we kind of ignored is like getting into schools sometimes it's keeping schools. And I think everybody, actually, with the exception of me, spoke about the importance of the relationship management. Your life will be so much easier if you've got a 90% renewal rate rather than a 70% renewal rate, because before you even can grow in the latter, you've had to do 30% of the sales you did last year just to stand still. So that's something it is as much about, in this game, I think, about giving a positive experience so they hang around next year, as it is about having an amazing sales team. So yeah, they're probably my thoughts. And ultimately, as you get bigger, by the way, it will just become a process. Right now, it's all going to be, I don't know what size and scale you're at, but if you're a smaller operator, it's going to be off the back of the person with that initial vision. But you will start to get a process behind it as you get a little bit bigger.
Thank you, John.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Can I just make a comment? Just Herman here.
Far away.
With regard to the contact details of today's this evening's presenters, is that possible at all? Their emails or contact details? Would that something you'll forward to us via email, or?
Yeah, you'll see some of them in the chat. Actually, I think everybody. Perhaps I don't know. Perhaps the exception of Hina has put their contact details in the chat. So
Okay, I'll check and see if it's there. Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
Hattie's got a hand up. Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't say this is something we've cracked at all. It's difficult, I would say, to get into heads. But I was just going to share one example that we've kind of been working with recently in terms of how to get in front of really senior decision makers. And that's partly through the elections work that we're doing. And like I said, the process that we've done with that is to be really, really engaged with the rest of the community of people who are trying to do this work. So kind of embracing the sector and trying as much as possible to really kind of become stronger than our parts. And like I said, doing a lot of kind of giving away support and help and kind of being a bit more open with our own networks. And we can see that kind of already coming back. So some of those people in our network are people like, Teach First, people like the Association of Colleges, people like Fair Education Alliance, people who have these massive networks themselves. And we've been invited to speak and get on the stage, as Jonathan was saying, at all of those people's events. And and then once you've been invited there, you're then doing something in collaboration with the Association of Colleges, and you've got a room full of senior leaders there. And that was, I mean, I don't know how much people would, it's potentially possible because of the type of work that we're doing, that we've been able to be really open with that. And it feels quite, in some days to me, even it feels quite scary that we've decided to do that. But it basically has got rid of our recruitment problem. We don't need to recruit schools and we don't need to recruit organisations because we've got a good enough offer now that people are coming to us. But that's also fairly unique because it's a general election year. So sometimes those sorts of things are possible.
Thank you so much, Hattie. Love the idea of getting rid of the recruitment problem. That sounds awesome.
Lee, if I could just jump in again with a practical example, if it's okay. So I think that's a really interesting example from Hattie, and actually it wasn't really much to do with me, but someone at the when I was at the Brilliant Club came up with the idea, and I think actually they were using a bit of public affairs support from an agency, but it was really good. They it was double-edged. So we ran our trips 3 times a year so we took children from schools to visit universities, and at those trips we'd have hundreds of kids, and it was typically geographically orientated. So we because we'd been trying to organize transport and stuff like that, so we would invite their MP along and do a photo op with each of the kids, and each of the kids would meet the MP, and we would then organize in the background all of the press releases to those schools' local press outlets with pre-agreed statements from all of the head teachers. And what we got off the back of it is we got political influence, because we did a photo op for all the MPs, making them look good in front of their in front of children from their communities. So that's, you know, always a positive for them. So we got some good connections out of it. And with the local heads, it's what I was saying earlier, we kind of got them into the press, and it really didn't cost us very much because all of this was templated. And we made the heads look good and we made the MPs look good. So there's something in it for each of them as well. So it's that sort of stuff, you know, and if, like, I don't really have ideas like that, but if you can find the people who do, now either they're in your business and let them go with it, or they're out of your business. But if they're out of their business, they're probably in a public affairs or a public relations agency. But there are some specialists like PLMR and Connect PA and a few others who do stuff in schools. You know, and the first conversation is always free, what I would say, you know, so you can normally get a little something, and then see if there's an opportunity if you don't have those in-house expertise and you've got a little bit of resource for this. But it's those win-wins, you know, if you can find some stuff like that, can be really can really snowball sometimes.
The only other sort of thing I just, from a personal experience, I'd say can work quite well at a relatively small and local scale is if within your kind of your immediate sort of ecosystem geographically, the schools in your domain, there's an awful lot of information, be it through kind of LinkedIn or the kind of various educational networks, about actually what the head teacher's particular areas of interest really are. What is it that actually really floats their boat and that they care about? And obviously, where there's a correlation between that and what you have to offer, but actually, irrespective, if you can find a way of basically meeting people at their level of interest and where their particular, you know, what's their kind of unique worldview, that's a basis for establishing a relationship, creating an excuse to actually build a dialogue rather than necessarily trying to go in at the point of sale. And I think that's often a mistake for any kind of small business. I mean, certainly for us in other sectors, we've tended to try and find a way of developing what we would call kind of insight-led relationships. So have relationships where you're providing each other with insight and dialogue and exploration, and use that as a basis for then starting to establish. I mean, that obviously it's a bit time-consuming, but when we were often getting started in new territories with a low, you know, kind of, we had no brand, we were competing with big kind of global players. They had to see us as people who had a really good mind and an interesting perspective to offer. And then over time, we could then find the moment to start telling them what we did, and then actually establish a kind of bit more of a commercial dialogue. But I think there's just so much information out there nowadays. It would be much easier than when we started doing this, you know, back in the Stone Age. So, yeah. Fabulous. Listen, I'm conscious that we've sort of we've virtually drawn to a close. Just want a huge thank you to our speakers. I mean, I think, you know, well, you know, Greg and Hattie, you know, and Johnny, I think have all put lots of kind of thought and energy into this. I would really encourage you to, you know, both to reach out to them and to one another as you kind of embark on this together. I think it's been fantastic, and we are putting a kind of another funding round together. So, you know, if you're in that situation where, you know, you have a particular sort of scale up project, or your organization's at a particular stage in its evolution where a combination of some additional funding and some specific mentoring support will be of value, then please do kind of consider putting an application in. It's kind of, I think it's worth doing. The money's a little bit, you know, the kind of pot is a little bit bigger, and the level of kind of engagement is perhaps a bit deeper than in previous incarnations. And yeah, we would love to hear about your organizations and your aspirations. So thank you all very much indeed. That's massively appreciated.